Good morning, Games for Change. My name is Devin Young. I'm Games for Change's new Chief Creative and Strategy Officer. And this morning, I'm delighted to bring to the stage the developer of Terra Nil, a game that's being featured in the immersive arcade downstairs and is nominated for awards tonight at the awards gala. And so Dominique Gawaloski, Jonathan Hau-Yoon, and Sam Alfred, the developers of Free Lives, will be joined by Faciane, game producer for Netflix, for a conversation around the process of developing the game. Please enjoy.
I do love that music. It's very invigorating when you come out here to that.
Yep.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Faciane. Pronouns are he, him. And I am a producer at Netflix Games on the external games team. And today with us, we have Sam Alfred, Dominique Gawaloski, and Jonathan Hau-Yoon from Free Lives. And we're going to be talking to you about Terra Nil today. So let's dive in. If you want to go a little introduction of who you are and what you do first.
I'm Sam. I was the lead designer on Terra Nil.
I'm Dominique. I'm the managing director of Free Lives.
I'm Jonathan. I was the lead artist on Terra Nil.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And they've come all the way from South Africa today, so if we can give them a round of applause for that. Now, if you don't know, Terra Nil is actually a reverse city builder game. So rather than building up a city, you're restoring a wasteland to a pristine environment. It's actually available down in the arcade to play today if you haven't played it yet, but it's also available on Steam and Netflix Games. And if you're using it on Netflix Games, you can use it on your mobile device. So let's dive in. Sorry about that. Let me get my notes up real quick. Cool. So Terra Nil was a bit of a departure from what Free Lives typically does. So if you're not aware, Free Lives is known for games like Broforce and another fun one called Genital Jousting. That's a good one. So what was the inspiration behind the concept of Terra Nil, and at what point in the process did you decide to incorporate real-world sustainability issues?
Free Lives has an interesting way of working where we have a whole lot of different teams at our studio, and the teams are kind of self-determining. And Terra Nil was started from a game jam, and we wanted to make a game that was taking inspiration from strategy games and city builders, but was about building nature instead of building cities. So that very early version of Terra Nil was very explicitly that. And you had this core gameplay loop, and your goal was to build nature rather than to increase population or increase currency or anything like that. But pretty quickly we realized that because we were making such a significant departure from traditional strategy games, we couldn't use many of the mainstays of the genre or the common practices in the design. And that left us in the lurch a little bit. We had to come up with another source of inspiration. And in many ways, throughout the design of the game, not just at the beginning, but nature and the natural world provided that inspiration. So the very first time this happened was in the original prototype of Terra Nil. We had this idea of water and greenery, but we realized that nature is not homogeneous. You can't homogenize all of the natural world, all of flora into greenery, and to say nothing of fauna. So maybe what we should be trying to do was to expand on the intricacies of the natural world, and so biodiversity became the second focus of the gameplay loop. And we have a floral kingdom, as we call it, in Cape Town, where we're from, called fynbos. And fynbos has a really unique property that it needs to burn to germinate. So plants will get pollinated and sometimes wait years until they're burned to release their seeds. And so we decided to take inspiration from this wonderful natural process on our doorstep and create a mechanic inspired by Fangboss in the game.
Yeah, and that's a really fun mechanic too in the game. You wouldn't think that, to restore this environment, you have to actually burn part of it down. It's kind of amazing to see that in the game, and it's really great that you included that from your home.
Yeah.
But another thing I want to talk about, I know that Terra Nil's been through a bunch of iterations, designs, and everything, but the final release product kind of took an industrial approach to how it's shown in the game with the art style and everything. If you haven't played the game, it's very relaxing. A lot of ASMR in it. When I was producing it for Netflix, I played it a lot to relax at the end of a long day. So why did you choose the approach of industrial means of restoring an environment rather than creating something that's more of an escapist, like cozy game, like cottagecore or something like that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I originally did take a cozy game cottagecore approach, and I actually really like a lot of those designs still. But when we tested it with our players, we had the pixel art prototype that had a more industrial feel, and then we had my shiny new art, and the response was kind of mixed. And one of the players wrote a very, very well-reasoned blog post about it, about how climate change is this industrial-sized problem, and that to solve it requires industrial-sized solutions. So that if we tried to show that there's this sort of cozy cottagecore aesthetic, it would make it more about individual responsibility, which seems like a bit of a red herring. And so that resonated a lot with them. And I was like, okay, that makes sense to me too. I guess I'll pack away my nice cozy buildings. But then we kept the cozy aesthetic for the environment. We wanted that to be lush.
That's great, and I love that concept of an industrial-sized problem needs an industrial-sized solution. So that's really great to hear. Thank you. The game was developed over quite a long time. It started before the pandemic, continued during the pandemic, and it was released this year. Just curious, Jonathan, I know we had chatted about this before, but what inspired you to work on this game?
Yeah, so I was already having a lot of climate anxiety. I felt really helpless. And here I am making video games, and what is there that I can do about anything? And it was also during the pandemic. So there was just compounded anxiety, and I felt I felt really useless. And then I played Sam's prototype, and even in its janky prototype form with its pixel art, and the music was like, I think it was a generated MIDI thing. Yeah. So it wasn't because of the aesthetics. It just still felt so powerful to be able to feel as if I was somehow able to make a difference, even if it was in this sort of escapist world. And I was also aware of there's work by a futurist whose name is Monica Bielskite. She writes about something she calls protopian futures, and it's about how she saw how there was just so much dystopian work in the world, and that it was almost forcing a lot of our thinking into assuming that a dystopian future was going to exist. And that it was kind of a responsibility of creative people to put out more things that were hopeful, and more things that were showing some solutions to problems. And so I really wanted that hopeful feeling. I really wanted to try and find ways of helping other people to feel uplifted and feel as if there is hope. And so part of that was in the art style, trying to have things feel like painterly and lush, feel as if you had stepped into a Ghibli-inspired movie. And then some of that was through musical choices, to have really hopeful music, to have sound effects that are physically based or physically inspired. So if you're panning around this world, you hear the little croaks of frogs and waterfalls and the rumble of thunder before it rains. So these are all things that we wanted to do to try and help people to relieve their anxiety, and to be able to find ways to go back to being useful people instead of scared.
Yeah, we get questions all the time about what happened, why is the world like this, like what is the story, and we even had discussions in the beginning of the development about do we expand on that? And for us, it was more important to talk about the future and give our players a sense of agency and the ability to do something than it was to like browbeat them with, oh, this is what went wrong, or exactly.
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to approach this and inspire people to do change in their everyday lives, right? Like, we already know that the world is a very rough place right now for many reasons, not just environmental. And I think if you were to provide that backstory, it might overwhelm the player. And if, you know, the goal is really to kind of ease some of that climate anxiety and inspire people to do change in their lives, I think you accomplished it by not providing that backstory. Yeah. And then, and then another thing that you mentioned too about the music before we go on to some of the production type stuff, you mentioned the music in it. And one of the things I love about this game is contextually, in certain points, the music will change. And just, was that something difficult to implement, or was that, you know, was it relatively?
So it was something that we wanted to do. Our initial thing was that we're starting from a desolate wasteland. Let's have desolate music.
Yeah.
And so we asked our composer. He's a French composer named Maidan. He composed the first track for the wasteland, and then we tested it with our colleagues. Some of them were just like, "This is so depressing. Like, I don't actually want to play anymore." And so we realized, okay, we have to tone some of that back. Across the board, the music is hopeful, but that when you start in the wasteland, it's more subdued. It feels empty, but not depressing. And that as you continue playing, we'd start layering other tracks over. There's a whole music system that we wrote that tries to queue up the right tracks for different scenarios. It had to undergo some iterations too, as everything in games do. But we're quite happy with the result.
Yeah, it's really amazing music. I'd love to hear, you know, just the soundtrack on repeat, you know. Yeah, I'd love to shift over to some production type stuff and kind of talk about some of the things you did with the team, Dominique. During development, I know that you partnered with the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and you did that to kind of learn a little bit more about what you were using as inspiration in the game. Can you tell us a little bit about that partnership and some of the things you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing was that when we started development on the game, we really wanted whatever revenue the game produced, that's a portion of that to be donated to an entity that's actually making a difference. In line with the whole idea that, you know, we're these individuals, we work at a game studio feeling quite crippled about how much of an impact can we actually make. Rather support people who do this for a living and who are the experts in making a difference. But we had some criteria we wanted met. You know, one was non-governmental, non-profit, worked in renewable energy, worked in habitat preservation, understood biodiversity. You know, this sort of the way the game is quite holistic in its approach to how you restore the wasteland to a thriving ecosystem. We wanted to work with an entity that sort of worked in a similar way, and it was a lot harder to find than we actually thought. We spent months looking, and then kind of oddly, out of, you know, by pure coincidence, I phoned up a friend of mine, a guy I grew up with, but I just kind of not spoken to in a really long time. But he's a pretty big deal conservationist. So he's a recipient of the Whitler's Award by Princess Anne. David Attenborough had done a short film on him, and so I phoned him up and I was like, this is what we're doing with this game and we're looking for an entity. And he's like, whoa, well, I've just started working as head of conservation for the Endangered Wildlife Trust. And he sent me their deck, and they do all of it, everything we were looking for. And they operate from like north of Tanzania right down to like the sort of northern parts of Southern Africa as well, of our country. And they deal in rural community education, you know, livestock education, co-development with solar farms, you know, because, you know, a lot of these renewable companies, they come in and they just like lay down solar panels and don't really give any mind to, are they interfering with birds' migratory paths or any nesting grounds and breeding grounds of different types of species within, you know, that biome. They don't. So they work now with these companies, do the research for them, and then give them advice and procure land that will be the best place to put wind turbines, to put solar panels. And then they also work in habitat preservation, biodiversity, and endangered species protection.
We learned that developing Terra Nil and then talking to the EWT that unlike Terra Nil, real world conservation, it's so complicated.
It is so complicated, yeah. Which is a kind of, I mean, we haven't brought them out yet, but we will soon. So that's what sort of motivated us to then do a series of little short films where the EWT loaned us their conservationists for the day. And we were like, okay, right. So there's the burning of the waste, burning of the fynbos in Terra Nil. Explain to people why this is actually important and how it works. And then it's a short little explainer video from an actual conservationist that deals in grasslands and fynbos, explaining why this mechanic of the game has to happen. But then also them telling us how we are really simplifying certain other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, it's great to kind of hear those differences between real life and, you know, the heightened reality of the game. But just as you're talking, like, it's still that concept of burning something down to renew it. Like, I think we can apply that in our lives almost. Like sometimes, you know, you're feeling down, you're feeling anxious about the world, and you just realize, I need to start over. And, you know, you don't obviously want to burn yourself down, right? But you can kind of use that as a way to like spin it to the positive and think about how you can take action. So kind of talking about that, and this can be to anyone, maybe Dominique, if you want to start, but what do you hope to inspire real world action from people who play the game?
I mean, I think, you know, as, you know, John was saying earlier, it's like that weight of the feeling that you're personally responsible for solving this problem. It's not going to happen, you know. You know, when we were discussing amongst ourselves, is that like if you really wanted to do something, it would be who you vote for, who make these larger legislative decisions that would make a real difference. But I think, you know, supporting experts, believing experts when they tell you what needs to happen, and you know, whether it be donating your time or money or information, I think that's basically what you can do.
Yeah. Anything to add?
I guess with Terra Nil, it's not an educational game per se.
Yeah.
It has loads of elements that were drawn from real life conservation inspiration, but as Dom's already said, we oversimplified things in many cases. But I guess what we would hope is that Terra Nil has the effect on our players that they want to go and read further. They want to be inspired. They want to realize that, hey, maybe there's something here that I could be interested in. Maybe there's a career here for me. Maybe I can learn more deeply.
That's great. And you know, when I was working on the game to come out on our platform, I actually did do a little bit of looking into things because you've included so much of your homeland, South Africa, in the game. Like, I'm probably going to butcher this pronunciation, apologies, but fynbos, right? Like, I didn't know what that was. And,
yeah, fynbos.
Fynbos, sorry. Yeah, so kind of wrapping it up here, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about sustainability in terms of human sustainability, because sustainability means a lot in the environment, but how does that translate into sustainability for game development and just putting all of your soul and effort into this, Dominique?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's something that Free Lives is very acutely aware of, is the treatment of their employees. You know, so for example, you know, after Terra Nil wrapped development, we were like, guys, go on holiday, go find your souls, go reconnect with your families, you know, and giving them the time that they need to do that.
It's very frustrating for our players.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that, you know, the fans are like, what's happening now? What's going? We're like, they're on holiday. We will reply to you when they get back, and they are feeling, you know, good and happy to be back at work. You know, we have big attention to wellness within the studio. You know, so we have a chef that cooks everybody a healthy meal every single day. If you want to go on leave. You know, don't feel like, oh, you got to count, like, do I get this? It's like, if you need a break, take a break.
Yoga classes.
We have yoga classes. We have art classes. If you're feeling like you need some help with your mental health, you know, the company will more than happily pay for you to go and see somebody. It's like, we really want to look after the people that work there, because that is sustainable work practice.
That's
A burnt out team is not worth anything to anybody, you know, and you want people to feel joy in their work and look forward to coming to work, especially if it's a creative endeavor that you're collectively undertaking as a team.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you know, working in the games industry myself for 10 years now, that I love to hear studios that do that really put, you know, your team's health first, because it really shows in the game if you're just burnt out and crunching all the time. But that's about it for our time. Wrapping up, though, I'd just love to say thank you so much to you, the entire Free Lives team, our wonderful partners at Devolver Digital, and thank you for joining us today. We are down at the arcade down below, and after the talk, Sam, Dominique, and Jonathan will be down there for a little bit. If you have any questions that you'd like to go ask them, either about the game or about what they learned along the way, they'll be more than happy to catch up with you down there. Thank you again for the time, and thank you for having us.
Thank you.